just, this is my historian brain, that they began with Black women in this case. They started somewhere else to ask about these women. So one of the things to know about socialist feminism is that's a controversial term. Socialist feminism within the Communist Party, controversial. Why? It sounds like it should be exactly there. Feminism has a history as a movement and as a term. And at this point, feminists referred to a movement developing out of the 19th century and the demand for suffrage, the right to vote. Just for a quick historical, point our finger at a date, when did officially, right, whether or not it was practiced, when did women gain access to the vote in the United States? It was 1920.
Yes, it was 1920.
Oh, thank God. Yeah, I was like, oh my God. Yes. So right in that period of the 20s. And again, we have to ask the question, yes, universal right to vote, but which class of women were utilizing the vote? Which races of women were utilizing the vote who actually could get to a poll, be given a ballot, put a vote, have that vote counted? So just to say the obvious, we have a history of voter suppression. So, okay, one of the fights within the movement called feminism was the right to vote. The other was the right to own property. So at this point, there was no access to property ownership by a woman. The right to have child custody, the right to divorce, the right to birth control. So these are basic civic rights that were being fought for. And under that rubric, this was the movement called feminism, beginning in the 19th century. Okay, so how much of this is finished? How much can we go? Got that. So, right to own property? Yes. The right to vote? With all the caveats, we're in a moment of intense voter suppression, but yes. What about the right to divorce? Yes. The right to child custody? Yes. The right to access to reproductive rights? No, not so much. Very sketchy. It's been shifted to the courts at a federal level. Absolutely not. Okay. The other piece to the feminist movement was the right to live, and this is even to a lesser degree, but it was hiding in there, the right to live without violence. Again, that's a no for now. Yeah. So if we think about, if we start with this definition of feminism from the 19th century, it's hard to figure out, well, why wouldn't communists like that? That we are on the side of equality, we are on the side of full rights, we are on the side of human access to self-development. Where's the critique? So since there are some folks who know the critique, that's a real question. Where's the critique of the feminist? Because it was happening right there in the 19th century. Communist women were standing up and saying, we have issues. Hi, welcome. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Well, you left out, I mean, some of the categories, I guess, included, but economic equality.
Mm-hmm. And economic equality in terms of the job. Absolutely, I did leave that. Yeah. So the right to get paid work, if you get paid work, to have equal job conditions and equal pay. Absolutely. Thank you for that. How could I forget? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I wasn't criticizing, but that.
No. That's a lot. That's
been a main
huge gap.
issue of.
Yeah, that might have been the kind of, yeah. Anyway, okay, good. Thank you. So where might lie the critique with all of these? Yeah.
Well, I think part of what, going off of what Carol was saying, I think is part of the critique from communist women at the time was that economic equality wasn't a major concern for a lot of early feminist women. And that class was a category that was pretty absent in a lot of early feminist critique. Additionally, so was the struggle against racism. When we look at like the early, feminist leaders, we see a lot of these women who were who came out of the abolitionist movement, but at some point there became a kind of key issue there between, the abolitionist ideal and the ideal of racial equality.
That's right.
And so I feel like with looking at the history of the Communist Party and of like socialist women in general,
They started with labor and
right.
anti-racism.
and
Yeah.
that was a huge issue. A kind of contradiction between those two kinds of political tendencies was that these women, class and race came first.
Right. So it is true in feminism in the 19th century, they did have an analysis of labor. There's been a lot of scholarship recently about Susan B. Anthony saying, if we have to choose, we're going to choose women's rights first. We are not going to pick up the question of African American rights and rights to lived equality. And that split was a real split. And the refusal to view economic rights as one of economic power became a big rift within the movement. So one of the terms which I'm learning, which I didn't know, that is becoming a kind of a fungible term of critique is girl boss feminism. So it's being slathered around to just about everything. But the critique in the 19th century was rights for which women? Access to a life without violence for which women? And in fact, in my own college, there was a fight against a very high level leader of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. And the movement against having Christine Lagarde come to campus was called Which Women? And then alongside it was an organizing campaign among the housing and dining hall workers, because here we were putting on a pedestal the head of the IMF, which was using debt policy to subjugate the world. And on the other side, they couldn't negotiate a living wage with the people who actually worked on the campus. So this Which Women campaign was along the grain of race and where race meets class. And so these stories have a way of repeating themselves, right? This isn't something that was only true in the 19th century. So what happened, because of the focus on what we might call civil rights, so with the employment question, it became around equal rights. Well, then you'd have to come back to that question of which jobs? So are we saying that service level jobs or piece rate jobs in the garment industry are living wage jobs, or are we asking to break the glass ceiling and the CEOs now have more women, right? These are debates we're in. Even if we're not as, our garment industry isn't as much dominated by piece rate, these are still the questions we're asking. Which women, right? Equality for whom, under what conditions, and where does our energy start? Where does it begin? So that's my quick, are we good? Does this make sense? Yeah.
I think maybe in terms of the context, remember at the same time, attitude towards gay and lesbians was very, the party itself was very conservative. I came to the party in 1976, and we had a big fight in DC for the bookstore in terms of the place of the gays and lesbians in the bookstore and the progressivism. So that was one of the issues. At the same time, so played some role. Also, I think we have to remember that yes, economic issues are fundamental, but cultural issues that sort of come along with it also play a very important role. Sartre, for example, and the bourgeoisie defined what women sold after and to serve the interests of the progressive. So those are the concepts. But I also wanted to ask you something. Separately, you made a presentation on the Indian Communist Party. And I,
Subsequently, meaning previously?
yeah, I remember I thought for the party, I think we
Your
had.
school, yes, correct.
You to bring some of their experience also in terms of how they are treated.
My own research is based in India, that's true.
I remember we had to
Yeah.
talk about.
Yeah, okay. Yes, so we will be getting there because this is we're beginning on critique. So we're getting to critiques. So just to set the stage for a concept that we're calling feminism, one of the things I like to say from the very beginning, and a number of Marxists from the 19th and 20th century said this explicitly, we are in favor of the women's movement. We are in favor as a program of feminism. We want equal rights. We want the right to vote. We want the right to own property. But where do we begin? In a word, which way? Where do we start? So this is the context which in some ways the language has changed, but in some ways the language has stayed, these debates have stayed the same. We might not be using the exact same. So what I thought we could do to start out, welcome. Maybe we should do one more round of names. Okay, I'm Lisa, she, her pronouns. This is good for us. It'll help us remember.
By the end, we'll be pros on everyone.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan. She, they pronouns. And just in case you did just come in, it's going to be interactive today. So feel free to grab some literature. If you don't have one, I have.
It would be
One
good to have, yeah, because we're gonna
Yeah.
do some reading
Okay.
off. Yeah.
Cool. So she, they also, and you can keep going. Ego.
Oh, hi, I'm Nico, he, they pronouns.
Hannah, she, her. Maybe she, her.
The most big,
Bennett, they, them.
Oh, Aaron, he, him. Gabriel, he, him. Spencer, he, him.
Carol, she, her.
Carpet. She, her.
Ben, he, them.
Rasa, they, them.
Charlie, they.
So let's start. This morning I was like, should we start here? Should we start here? Let's start with some of their questions. So remember, we'll be drawing on what we know rather than having to transmogrify and become someone who we're not. And let's start with some of their beginning questions. There's one on page 7 of this handout. Right there. Yeah, let's start here. This is a good one. So at the bottom of page 7, and if, I don't know, do you does it work to kind of chat with somebody close to you? Kind of helps to learn each other's names.
Yeah, the interactive portions have been definitely the best, so please.
Okay, all right, good. I wasn't sure.
Yeah. no,
Okay. So at the very bottom of page 7, for this, and they start with this question, for the seminar on women in the party and women in leadership, we would like all participants to indicate what they think are the main problems and questions that should be dealt with in the discussion. So already as a question, it's like, we're not going to decide the outside. Of course, we have some issues that we want to deal with, but we need to shape this conversation from our collective. So take a minute to think about the collectivities that you've been part of. And if we ask that question about women in, if you have political experience, great. And if it's a more social experience, still useful. Okay. What needs to be talked about if we're talking about women in a political organization, in this case, the CPUSA, and women in leadership in political work or in a collectivity? What are the main problems? And we can now be here and now, and based on your own experience, what are they? And if you could scrabble down notes on this piece of paper, that's one way. Or Nika really kindly gave me some sheets of paper here, and there's a pen, and you can just scribble them down here if that's the best way. So take a minute, find 1 or 2 people and brainstorm. What are things we should be talking about?
And if you haven't grab a snack, there are snacks on the back table and there's some waters over there as well, so feel free to help yourself. All right, cool.
Each second.
Right at the bottom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so literally, I'm cheating.
Right, yeah.
So we're already.
So.
But, so yeah, what do you want to share? Well, first of all, I just like, I'm just right now. I mean, like, so.
Like, all of that. So, these one of mine.
No.
Papers.
Or like, you know, going up like.
Who's doing a lot.
A lot. I'm like, I'll write it like.
What we're focused.
You know, conscious leadership kind of make sure that you have to.
Right.
Things that you already know.
Right.
What to have.
Yeah, it's a constant.
And it was like acknowledged that.
I would say like a third of our bands. Oh, I know this is non.
They're going to.
So I think.
Yeah. So, okay, so for background, this is great. So the Virginia State Environmental Coalition, in the like mid 2010s. And
Cause I was kind of.
really just on there, PFW, TVA, they like overlap a little bit and like it's like outside of the
People are
and there is this, there is this event in Virginia,
But I was
very sadly incredible, like,
like, you know.
incredibly, like,
You know,
strong, like,
It's
like very rad, but the experience of those that are just like when you have like I just like a very low stack, it doesn't have to be every single thing they like that or it's not like
Personal.
that's crazy. That's like or like oh what are you guys together on the day that we're at
or feel more confident. So, yeah, no, I like that point.
yeah. I think we like someone that took on
Oh,
yeah. Like there's so much like socialization in there as well, where like it's like internal work, but also like and also people responsibility for like you know like passing on like institutional yeah it's like which takes a lot of work and it was something that like me and like so and a lot of that got but anyway, you're very well, like, it's not stoppers, like,
I don't like that.
yeah, like just be.
How long?
But the time.
Well, I was thinking another 3 minutes. This is when- If there's any precedent, we go.
Invested in data, like a gender diverse.
I'm just like, here,
Class.
here, diverse,
They
or
have
whatever.
And then,
Right, other people will do that.
I think I remember that from that.
So that request and
question.
kind of that. Which is.
Right next to.
You feel like not doing the work, that sounds like usually they have to do down.
Like that's
It just doesn't feel like actually. So I really like that. What is it? Okay, put it that way.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking about
Oh, sure.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, awesome.
You know, like.
I remember that. If you have some points to go, pretty soon we're gonna, unfortunately, I know group is the fun. We're gonna pull it back and share what you've been adding. So I don't wanna stop anyone from finishing their sentence. Take a minute and finish your thought. So,
Yeah.
Making labor.
I feel like, yeah, not.
I know that.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna call you out. Your idea. I wanna make sure we brought that. So this was a question before they even held the seminar. This was the question that they gave out to all of the participants. And as I mentioned before, this is within the party. It's pretty obvious from the document. That's how they frame it and that's how they're thinking of it. And even though the circle widened and widened and widened, they were still looking predominantly at women who are holding leadership positions. And this could be a club leadership, could be at a district level, could be at the national level, but some notion of a kind of leadership role. So that kind of organizational work that a leadership role requires. So what did you come up with? So oftentimes in this world we live in, I don't know if you've noticed this, but leadership, the word that is missing when we hear the word leadership is corporate. So this is not that. When they say women in leadership, they're talking about women in leadership roles in movement politics. So it's kind of obvious, but I wanted to say it out loud. I think leadership has almost got a hidden adjective now because it's used so much in that kind of corporate speak. Okay, so what did you come up with? If we were organizing this event, right now, what do we have to talk about? And you can report back on something you said or something that someone in your group said. And as you report back on someone in the group said, make sure you use names because it just helps us keep that in case. Yeah.
Well, this isn't directly addressing the question, but I thought it was really interesting that the question posed asked all participants as opposed to just the women. I think that's particularly relevant.
And it is relevant because as you noticed, they were inviting men to this gathering.
Yeah.
Right, so they were asking all participants, that's such a good point. So they were asking all participants that were both men and women, and they explicitly say, we have to have men at this. We have to have them as part of this seminar. Yeah, thank you for that. So what were things that were absolutely essential? Yeah.
I think two major questions were who is doing what work? And do we have expectations about who's supposed to do what work? And if we want to address these issues, one of the major problems is that we need to make sure, Mohsin was talking about how we need to make sure that the space in which these problems are to be addressed is a space in which people feel comfortable expressing their criticisms, and that it's a space in which people are comfortable to receive criticism as well.
So writer here. So I fiddled a little with your last point. Let's see if this works. What atmosphere does this seminar need to create for a more, a more critical discussion? Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, what else do we have? Yes, Carol, right?
Yes, so, I actually was involved.
Yes, I love it.
I think that. I mean, there are a lot of things in terms of a variety of organizations at this time. Whether they were union organizers or involved in SNCC or whatever. It was really a challenge to have women assuming, be selected or supported in a leadership position. Even though they may have helped organize and form the organization, that still was the case, and they all frequently were relegated to, the lowest kind of work within the organization. So they
And
were,
what was that? What was
well, maybe secretarial work or preparing the meals or making sure the room was set up right, and none of the glamorous, they weren't given time to speak, that kind of thing.
He done sexy work.
Okay.
And within women's organizations, the issue of labor and union and working class issues, that was really difficult to get that to be a high priority.
So that got shoved down the list of the issues.
Right, and I know even recently, some organizations that I'm involved in, that were, women's organizations primarily and advocacy organizations. I was frequently the one that would remind them, oh, well, what about equal pay? Even though, everybody knew about it, but it wasn't as top priority, right?
Okay. So let me take that statement about 1972, and thank you for that contextual. I'm going to be asking a million questions. That contextual information. Is that true now? In our collective experience, is this like problem solved, time to go, all right, work that out? So say it for the here and now. I saw, there's like lots of nods.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, please, I put this on, I can talk all day.
Just to be honest, I touched on the intersectionality that often comes up but is ignored within like some of our have also touched on their workplaces and like the experiences we had as like femmes or like being perceived as them. For me, I am try to be perceived as a man now amongst cis people especially. So I kind of have experiences of like, I remember what it's like to be a woman. So like, I also kind of have some of these experiences, these memories that now I kind of get to see the other side. And absolutely kind of spoke to it more respect. And I'm sorry to say, yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, so, then saying like, as like a male scientist, like the word is just taken for like, yeah, absolutely, I believe you, but like when a female scientist says it, it's kind of like, are you sure you didn't switch those notes up with your diaries, maybe? Like, it's kind of that attitude of like, are you sure? And like, absolutely, sorry, with Carol, yeah.
Yes,
Carol, yeah, what Carol was saying, yeah, no, what Carol was saying is something that I, of course, like, read about from previous like organizations' experiences, and then I've kind of seen similar things happen in organizations I've been in. So like reading about like the history of the Brown Berets, like the women were like, oh, it's cooking, and they told us they didn't want to hear from us. So they told us like, can you please go make sure lunch is ready though, because that's important work too. And like we gotta eat to like keep the movement going, babe. And like that, yeah. So I think absolutely we very much kind of have some of those firsthand experiences of not being taken seriously. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you remind me of your name?
Charlie.
Charlie, thank you. You had your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think that whenever there are these intersections, there can be a lot of blind spots. And so, and we talked about like tokenism, sorry, remember your name. Angela had mentioned tokenism, and like, I think a big implicated phenomenon is that when you have someone being tokenized, then they become representational, and that doesn't account for all the other intersections. So like, for me, I am definitely like aligned with womanhood, and I can identify as a Black woman, but I don't identify as a woman, because I'm non-binary. And so, but that does mean that when cooking or cleaning needs to happen, I'm gonna think to do it for a lot of people around me. And I think that while sometimes work is getting like assigned to certain people and not others, when that work is not being done, the people who are
Step up.
socialized, yeah, so like, if you were raised as a woman or socialized as a woman, then you might also have this ingrained in you that you're gonna step up to do it, if it's being left undone, and might not think about the ableism that gets, you know, if we don't have food, if we don't have access, or those kinds of things, it's like, oh, who's gonna be like, no, there should be snacks there, you know, and just go and make sure that.
Yes.
No, Brian and I just went like, whoop, like, yeah, I mean, like, for background, like, Ryan and I are both educators, and like, we both like have like been like for the past couple of Jones, like very much investing in this more interactive space, like when Carol was like getting the room set up and making sure it's the right people, just that's what we're on. Okay, and because we really, I think just by nature of, you know, like why we come to this work and how we do this work and the way we've been socialized, it just like, we like are, it's just so ingrained in us to like take that, to step up into that work without even asking to delegate it.
And there are questions of value in there, right, too. So it's not simply like I am programmed like a robot into this reproductive labor of care, right? But it's also, as a political person, I know if there is care, there is a space for people to be present, to open into the world that we're attempting to make. And Angela, and then I saw Mika, you had your hand up.
No, yeah, I mean, it's so funny because we didn't talk about that in our group, but that was like exactly what I was about to say, is that like women tend to pick up the slack when it comes to things that don't occur to men to do. And that ends up making like enriching the space in a way, or even having things that like are essential, but like it simply does not occur to men to do those things or think about those things. And so that's something that we all but we also in our group talked about like I mean, Ben brought up the point of like you know, questioning knowledge or acumen of women, which I think we kind of had a brief discussion of how interestingly, or like some of the examples of, you know, misogyny or sexism that we might see in our broader society, like are still very much present in like when women are in leadership positions in like an organizing role, and it's kind of like, oh, well, shouldn't we be better? But it's all of those same things are very like replicated within the space often, I think, and that includes like just like lack of respect, not only about like ideas, but it's like, oh, someone being spoken over, or like things that I think from the perspective of, you know, someone doing those things would not even occur to them as like, oh, I'm doing something sexist right now. But like, that's, I think, the insidious nature of it is that it's so ingrained that it's not conscious.
And sometimes even when it's being done in a sexist way, one doesn't consciously even recognize it at the moment. It's like, oh, all right, I guess what I was saying is not.
Right.
Yeah, I actually had a point, and then I thought of another point listening. I'll say both. So I feel like we talk a lot about like the labor of like, you know, cooking, cleaning, setting up, but it's also, I feel like women tend to get put like, I know emotional labor is used a lot, but like a lot of times men on the left are almost combative sounding, and then they're like, oh, well, you should reach out to those people because people don't see you as, you know, as assertive, as aggressive. You should reach out to those people because you're so much nicer. You know how to craft a good text message with them. And it's like, okay, well, now, why can't you learn to not use a passive aggressive period? It's really not that hard. You know, and it's so funny because I also am like of the trans masculine experience, and sometimes people see me I'm like in this weird in between where some people read me as woman, some people read me as man, and like I feel like the way they treat me is so different, not only in how like they'll be so surprised when I'm empathetic when they read me as a man, and it's like we really need to expect men to be more empathetic because I'm not even that nice a person. Like, the fact that you're impressed because I like listened to your feelings for 5 minutes, the bar is in hell.
Like, quite literally, yeah.
Oh, I thought we were kind of like touching on socialization, and I think about this interaction often. My father died when young, and I was raised by all of them, my mother, my aunt, like my 5 older sisters. But I remember I was 15 years old, and my mother put my, like, when we went to the restaurant, had me be the one to like make the table for us. And she was like so proud. And I think back on that moment, being like, that's so fucking weird. I was a kid, but like there's no dad around. So like she was like proud to like make me the man in this weird social way. To like put me, a literal child, as like this one's making the reservation for the family. You know, and like I think about that interaction often. It's like what a weird socialized moment from a woman who's a very progressive, you know, feminist woman from, you know, the 70s and 80s, but she was so proud to socialize me in this way. I think about that often.
Yeah, I think back to what Angela was saying and what you were saying about like these, what Angela was saying about the contradictions in like socialist spaces where you have these ideals that we, you know, that organizations have claimed to uphold, but oftentimes you find the same sexism in these organizations. And with that socialization that basically all people that were raised male go through, you kind of need, and this has already been touched on, but you need women in power, not just in like the tokenized way like we talked about, but like so that there's that almost deprogramming of that chauvinistic socialization that males receive. Because it can't just be that like a group says like, oh, we're anti-sexist, we're feminist, but it has to be that there are women in power to enforce that and to make that a actual policy that's in place and not just kind of an idea.
I see your hand.
And I'll let her go first.
Thank you. So yeah, just to work off of exactly what you just said, we were talking about in our group about in any type of collective, which I just mentioned, I like that you use the word collective because it's not always just organizing spaces like we know, but in any space that you have a collective, is it just by coincidence that like, you know, white male cis people fall into these roles of like leadership or the first to talk? Or is it, you know, by our societal like structure and the way we're raised? So I thought that was really important. And one thing that I posed to Nico was like, you know, so basically what you're saying is that this takes an active effort all the time. It's not just one time of saying, well, we're going to have these people in this space because it's important to have these voices. But then when those voices get into the space, you're still talking a lot. Like you still have to shut up. Like stop painting your nails, that doesn't matter. Like, and start actually listening to the people that you say that you want in the room. Like when they actually show up, are you actually listening? And one thing that we also kind of talked about a little bit was that the fact that like, oftentimes if we are talking about organizing spaces, you know, we still want this very curated package to sell to the American public of why like communism or socialism should be attractive or why you should be, you know, wanting to like, you know, join us. It still uses like a very patriarchal heteronormative outlook to say this is, but what we like, even though I fit this, you know, description of what this country accepts, we are anti-racist, anti-sexist, you know, we support trans people, we do these things. And it's like, yeah, but you're still packaging it in the way that the world agrees it should be packaged. So like, how effective does that really come off to people that you're saying you want to bring into the fold? And I think that's why oftentimes like we lose a lot of people is because you're saying you want them to show up, but then when they show up, you're not actually giving them the space to show up the way they can. Like everyone doesn't need to be a well thought out speaker or highly educated. If anything, we need people that actually understand the plight of the everyday person that doesn't have access to those resources to show up and be themselves and be like, oh, but actually, what does your life look like? Like, yeah.
And what's the space we need to make?
And what do we need? Exactly. Going back to the atmosphere. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
think also, I think a big issue that I've experienced, being somebody that comes from a feminist background, that comes from somebody who primarily organizes around like women's issues and around like feminist movements and history. I think that one of the things that I keep running into is that men don't prioritize or care about women's political issues. And that is on top of the interpersonal issues. I think that every single time I have organized an event around discussing women's issues, until this weekend, it is always the lowest attended. And it is
Yeah, this
always
is amazing,
almost,
by
and
the
it
way.
is always, and it is almost always just only women who attend. And I think that it is a continual problem of women's issues being looked at like a peripheral, as like, this is an addendum to like talking about political economy. This is an addendum to talking about like building power. This is an addendum to talking about race or racism. This is an addendum to talking about like national oppression. And I think that consistently, the conversation has to keep coming back to the like basic mathematical question of this is half of the world. Half of the world is not a secondary question. It's not a peripheral issue. This is a central issue. This is a central issue in every conversation that's happening.
In every collective.
And I think that has been a real struggle. And I can't imagine what my women comrades feel like in terms of like trying to push that struggle, because I know that it really takes a lot out of me in an emotional sense too, of like, I keep trying to do this thing and nobody is coming. It's like, how do you force people to show up? Because that becomes a major problem, because if people aren't showing up, the work that the people that need to show up the most are not the ones showing up. So like, how do you make sure that work gets done? That is like a question I think that needs to be addressed.
I saw your hand and I realized that I haven't remembered your name. Mary, that was my guess, and then I wasn't sure.
So, as we talked about this, even though we have very different experiences, we found that there were maybe two issues, going back to the question, that would need to be dealt with immediately. One is the issue of men taking over. And men being asked to speak, men volunteering to speak, men being louder, talking longer, still exists. And then another issue would be to what extent would one have the discussion with both men and women, or allow, encourage women, support women in having their own session.
Okay, so you've raised a really important point, which was a question in this moment as well. So where are these spaces gender mixed? Where are these spaces maybe women only or women and femme only? Like maybe this is something that's still being asked, right? And was asked at the time. Thank you for both of those. Did you want to add? Does that feel like an accurate addition? Fabulous. Okay. Yes.
I think for me, it goes a lot to like the devaluing of like not only the people involved, but like the labor involved too, because it's not about just like femmes not rushing to do the women's work or something. It's also about men and others taking pride in doing those same jobs and making those same jobs getting done. And it's something that I working as an iron worker and being in all male spaces, while it was a union space and a very like collective brotherhood space, while I was getting like harassed and devalued at work or something, like a theme that kept coming up was like a lot of these jobs have not been in the public eye, like seen as like good jobs to pursue, like trade jobs and labor jobs and yeah. Anyway, so
Which are the jobs?
for me, it was iron working.
Okay.
I'm talking about like, but various trades, like the numbers of people going into these are very small compared to the people that are going to retire in the next 5 to 10 years. And so we don't, these jobs are not getting, the new generation is not coming in at the rate that they need to be able to continue, but it is like the backbone work that needs to be done at some, without development, but that's a whole nother thing. And so, but meanwhile, there is still all this like sexism and transphobia and all this stuff. So it's like, how can you invite people into this space knowing that they're not going to be safe in that space? But it also gets tied into that labor not being valued and being encouraged in the first place too. And I liked how Bennett kept bringing up like the work and like women's women's political issues and personal issues not being seen as valuable labor that needs to be done is why, oh, okay, it'll just fall to the women to fix that, even though it affects all of us. And so like that work, like trade work, like getting valued more should bring in a diversity of people concerned about that issue getting solved because they see it as a larger part of it affecting all of us.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned trade jobs. My dad's a trade unionist. He was an electrician. He's retired now. And
I'm a
it's-
farmer now,
But I'm so glad because people talk about these trade jobs and they're always like, well, these are, 97% men. In the case of electricians, at least, it's like mostly men. And I feel like mainstream feminists outside of like socialist circles tends to focus a lot on like very like college educated jobs and like kind of like, oh, well, those are the trade jobs. We shouldn't encourage women into those necessarily because a lot of these women are from very liberal upper class backgrounds where college degrees are expected and they're the ones kind of in the leadership of those kind of movements. And I think about this all the time because there's at the same time that like trade jobs are being kind of like written off as not for women, conservatives get so up in arms about the fact, why are so many women getting college degrees and men not getting college degrees? And it's because those trade jobs are very open and very lucrative for men. And the majority of those men do not have to fear the kind of harassment, including sexual harassment, that is very, very present in those jobs. And even if it's not sexual, I remember my dad came home one day, he's a misogynist. And he was like, oh, a woman messed up at work today. Of course, like, why should a woman have this job? Like, it's not a woman's job. Like, that's the kind of stuff you expect if you're a woman going into this industry.
Angela, and then, wait a minute, brain, come on. Ding, it's not there.
It's Charlie.
Charlie, okay.
Yeah, I actually wanted just like to go back and respond to Bennett's point, actually. Something that just clicked for me is that I think like, and other women organizers in the room, feel free to respond or validate or not validate my experience. But I think I realized that I think for some women who are in leadership of collectives, as you put it, like sometimes there's almost like a self-censorship that takes place where it's like, we don't necessarily want to like put on events about women's issues because we feel like that's almost like too much of our like niche and then no one else is gonna want to come to it. And like, it would be more interesting if we put on an event that like might appeal to more people and is not just like gonna be only attended by women. So that also makes me doubly appreciate Bennett for like putting on these events just to shout you out real quick. But yeah, I think it is something where it's like, I think sometimes women might almost not want to like focus so much on women's issues, because we just don't feel like they're valued. So it's almost like, what's the point?
Nice. Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, no, I just, Ben definitely, I get the front brought up for me, a couple points that they, and also started touching on something we were in group too, they, were finding out also just like the tokenism that is experienced by women all over, but also just like in some of the organizing spaces, like you're a Black Jew, and like some of the like Jewish groups that we went to were like, we've got a Black person in the room, like awesome, and it's just like, you know, that like all Black people are cool with this, or like you just met them, like we don't know anything about them, and like also the tokenism of like, no, don't worry, we've got a guy, but it's like, who's that guy though? Like the person that represents the representative of like, oh, we have a woman on board. It's like, but is the woman like J.K. Rowling? Like, right. Oh, there's a Black woman in charge. It's Kamala Harris. That doesn't always mean something good. I think also the same point that was made of like, it can't just be a one-time thing. We also can't put people in charge and be like, now they never said anything wrong, and they can never be challenged. They might be right about 99% of the things, but they say one thing wrong, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be challenged. And I think that the tokenism goes so many different ways, and experience, I think in so many different ways of like, oh, don't worry, like we've got someone who vouches for us, or who, so our whole group, we can't be, don't worry, like, we're definitely thinking about Indigenous people because I'm an Indigenous person in the room. And it's like, so you really can't you can't be an afterthought, can't be an aside. And you're, just thinking about with one of the other jobs that they just experienced, that they kind of alluded to, was a white cis woman who started her own company and then, really kind of shoddily put some stuff together and have made great profits. And she gave herself 2 maternity leaves, like for her own birthing her own baby and her partner birthing a baby, fair. But then didn't want to give an employee a maternity leave, who was also like a cis white woman like herself. And they just were always like, yeah, I'm working on it. And she was like, okay, but I'm actually trying to get pregnant. Like, can you just tell me? And they were like, yeah, there'll be office work. And they're like, actually, never mind, there isn't office work. They gave the office work to someone else that they brought in for it. And then so that person had to leave. She got a different job that's paying on maternity leave. Then for a second, she was like, okay, like, let me get a nanny. Like, would she be interested? Okay, never mind, it's not gonna work. But then you're like, wait, so she can pay you, someone will pay her to be home for maternity. But then she has to go back to work. She has to pay for someone to take care of her baby. But no one will pay for her to take care of her own baby.
Right.
But somebody's gotta be paid to take care of her baby. That's a $20 job, an hour job.
Yeah.
Like, maybe,
Yeah.
but not the own mom. No, because that's women's work.
Right.
So I bet she all of a sudden they're like, oh, because you're staying home, you're gonna take care of like the food and the laundry and everything else, right? So it's crazy, like seeing that firsthand of like, even in her, now she has a better job that was gonna give her maternity, that was gonna give her these benefits, but she still has to go back to work and pays for someone else to take care of her baby. It was just a really like mind blowing thing for me to really recently think of.
Right.
For that.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yes, and so now we're moving into the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there was one other question. We've touched on a lot of issues that are overlapping with their second question, but I want to make sure, because we are so rich with thoughts and experiences, and I'm a little worried that we only have 2 hours together, I wanted to make sure to have this question in our thinking again for today. So on page 11, and it's the 11 of this handout. Again, right at the bottom, at their gathering, they had one man, they list who came, and you were literally present at this one?
No, I wasn't literally.
Oh, okay, I was like, well, I want the backstory, but you were in the party at this time.
Well, I was close to the party and involved with people that were in the party. I joined the party about a year after this.
Okay.
But I was involved, but I knew some of the issues that were being addressed at that time.
Okay, great, thank you. So right at the bottom of 11, Comrade Ruben, the one man who came to this, and he picked up the piece on male supremacy and women in the party, as you can see. And so he was sort of the discussion leader of this section of the seminar. Comrade Ruben pointed out that in the fight against male supremacy on a mass level, we have to ask and answer. I sort of felt like that transition between Charlie's point and this is connected. We have to ask and answer the question, what are the main problems and key ideological questions preventing males from entering struggles around women's issues? So this one is rich.
Yeah.
And I do feel like, if you don't mind going into small groups again, do you feel like recommuning? Yeah.
Should we maybe try and switch up the groups?
Yeah.
switch
All right,
up
let's
our-
switch up the groups. And the question is, what are the main problems and key ideological questions preventing males? So this is 1972. We could work on that term a little so that it's closer to where we are. From entering struggles around women's issues. Okay. Okay.
Can I just count them off real quick?
Yeah.
Please do.
Groups of, so we'll do count to 1 to 5. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4. Sorry, keyboard.
5.
1,
2,
5.
1, and then it'll be 2. Okay, cool. So we'll do 1's here, 2's back there-ish, 3's right here. 4's can go right over here, and 5's right where Mary is sitting. So if you're a 5, Mary, you can stay. Are you not a 5?
No.
Okay.
I'll be a fine.
No, it's okay. What number were you? 3? Okay. Great.
Okay.
Oh, I'm a work.
Yeah. So one are here, two are there, three, Hannah, you're in the right spot, and three are always one. Right there, and
I'm not kidding, I know I'm.
We're one. Okay, cool.
Like, in my head.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So bad.
I'm talking about your- yeah, I know, like,
It was like on my radar.
Yeah.
What a great question.
And I'll mix it all up on.
Yeah. What if we had three?
Where's three?
Me too.
Right, the right, that's right.
Okay, but what if we go with the one that has only two votes?
Yeah, I'll go with
Yeah,
that.
that, it only got first, like.
I'll go over here.
Yeah, this is.
Of all the reasons that we're going to be when I translate. That's just.
It's kind of seen as, honestly, even at this point, like, I know we're talking about that too, but in the end of the day, politics as a whole.
It's similar, but it's a little bit similar to like.
Politics in general.
Well, you know, it's
That's
black.
just something
Black is
male.
black to black, and it really doesn't come
I
out.
know that changes a little bit.
But the thing I think they sometimes is that we're focused on percent five
Not males,
labor,
especially in
big,
politics.
which is then they will bring everyone in. I think that. But also too, I
guess it's
a lot of it is just like
I'm
association. I think
technically
like a
on
lot of
the
times.
party now.
It is similar to what we said, but also it's like.
School and really the people that are involved. in a lot of
You know, that's like,
this
it
that
comes
are
back to me, because sometimes.
larger number, like,
We can't have this conversation every time we go, right? Like, I can't continue with it.
on average. I don't know if that is sort of very perspective.
No, that's fascinating. And, okay, sorry, just to, I'm very interested in, so you're saying that in your experience, like, in your school, as a whole, like, male students are less interested in politics compared to students of other genders. That's so interesting. Do you have any idea why, or?
It's.
But I think,
Things.
so sometimes it's hard, because like you said about.
Students tend to be.
It's not only a particular school, right? However, if you want.
I'm speaking from my personal experience, but I do think it's generational,
That's
to an
where
extent.
you have
Where
to think first,
I
right?
think especially now, like you're seeing this,
So that's kind of where I get
a lot
caught
more
up,
women
because
are
I
graduating
understand.
from higher education than men now.
Part of the.
So I think we kind of see that in almost increasing, where a lot of
We have enough.
males,
You know, we don't need to add, you don't have to, you know,
tend to really not put
but that's
any
kind of where I get caught up. Yeah, but I've only.
learning anything that doesn't directly impact them. There's not really much curiosity when it comes to learning about things.
You know, I get caught up in that.
So you have like female students, non-male students that are more interested in different topics.
That's me.
And those students are just kind of,
Socialized, you know, like.
their life is so mostly entertainment,
Those issues
really
are.
the process of learning.
We have to think. Oh, God. We're in a bad situation.
And it's hard to engage people, like really difficult to engage people in conversations that go beyond just their own personal experiences. That's what I see.
No, thank you for your insight. I'm very, very fascinated by your perspective, and I think it's an important one to pay attention to. Yeah, I'm talking more later. Like, I mean,
Well, maybe not share their one.
yeah. And if you're, yeah.
Yeah,
You're right. You've already. But, you know, it's interesting, because I would think that like, okay, so I'm 27, so when I was in high school and college, I think there were a lot of men or like male students who were interested in politics, because they saw it as like a leadership and maybe like a status thing. So maybe that's changing where like people aren't thinking that way.
I'm just gonna have one little thing here. I think it's because of social media, essentially, where I think you've seen this association with politics with the most common example people use is like the black square thing. That, you know, during the like BLM being a big thing in Republican in 2020. And people saw that as almost something a high school age teenage girl or whatever would post, and it almost made it so that males associate politics with feminine, like have a feminine association, and for teenage males, it has a connotation. Right. I think, and now it might change once you get into college, because there is, that kind of filters out a lot of people. So if you're in a institution of higher education. But I think I'm talking about the majority of people, majority of, if we're talking about all people, not just those that are getting a higher education, there is kind of like just that, I don't care, it doesn't, they don't think it affects them at all. So it's just kind of a difficult thing to.
That's not good. Okay. Much to think about. I wonder if on some level also women might think that it's like, I don't know, maybe the, I don't know, maybe they back that in like women's issues, and they're like, oh, like I don't have personal experience in dealing with sexism or whatever, so I'm just gonna let them deal with that. I don't want to overstep type of thing. Maybe that's like where the well-meaning male person is like, I'm not sure that like, yeah, I don't have a great, they don't want me to sort of like overhanding and being like, oh, I don't know. I don't
Back to that direction really good, because one thing that I've noticed a lot is the average, and I know I'm like over focusing on young people, but that's kind of the next generation that
No, please do.
dealt with in this political space.
I think it's important to see.
Friend groups tend to be very generous, and I know that's not a new thing, but especially now, like if I look at people, and the relationship between like male students and non-male students is either non-existent on a platonic level, or that implies the only view is that it could be romantic. So there's really, that is, I'm kind of like an outlier because pretty much my entire perimeter is not male. That's just kind of how I've been for a long time. But it's kind of the opposite of the average male. So not only do they not feel like they have level of activity, they don't have anyone in their lives that is talking about these things. Whether, you know, it's not the same as having someone that's your age that you care about in a way that isn't in a romantic, trying to get with that person. There's very little platonic crossover, so you don't have that like men, even males are young, like even have that experience to that, experiencing it.
They don't even they don't even know the issues that women or girls are facing because they're not exposed to them, right? This is very interesting for me, by the way, because I work with young people for my job, including some high school students. They're mostly female, so I don't feel like I get a lot of perspective of like male students related to like organizing or politics. So Okay, so we talked about like social pressure or like lack of interest in politics broadly. Maybe like privilege or conversation, and then like feeling of not understanding that or lack of respect. Yeah. Alright, do you think there's any way to like,
I was thinking, is it the fear of being
like thinking about your peers, do you think there is anything that you've done that would make them care?
Largely,
coming in spaces where they're saying.
I think one thing is that there has to be a higher targeting of like, they need to realize that those issues don't just affect people that aren't, that they do still affect them, and that they do matter. But as far as like you're saying, lack of perspective, they, I don't know how to deprogram people, but it just, I think there just needs to be a crossover, making sure that males do have friends that aren't female, because that is where it starts. You know, of course, it's political, but nobody views it as political. It's just like boys are over here. There's not, it's that's how it was in like elementary school, right? But the thing is, I grew out of all, and a lot of people didn't. And it's kind of be seen more broadly.
Boys are also inclined to be less empathetic, and there are, I don't know if you've heard of this, but like there are many places where like, a guy, like let's say in college, will like try Molly, like MDMA for the first time, and like realize what it's like to have, it's like a meme, right? Realize what it's like to have empathy, and they like their entire worldview changes, and then women are over here like, you had to do a drug to like have empathy, like that's crazy. But I mean, maybe that is something that I have seen, you know, men build empathy over time, but it is like something that's intentional, and maybe it is that it's harder to do as a young person, and that like, I don't know, maybe as your brain develops, like you develop more of that compassion.
There's that the thing that you said, talk about your emotions. I'm not sure if it's this, I know that you but you don't talk about emotions. You can't develop your own internal monologue, your own self-analysis. Like, I feel like people can only develop those skills through talking to people, and entirely male friendships just don't really talk about that stuff. Whereas my best friend, she got a boyfriend months ago, and you don't need to know what she's about to talk to them. It's been a whole thing for 2 months where our entire friend group has kind of tried to talk to her. And so my point being is that this guy has no friends. He has like 1 or 2 male friends. And besides that, he's totally isolated from other social spaces. And you can tell the effect of that because he has no interest in anything. There is this social isolation. This isn't always the case, but especially for males that aren't involved in anything, like not involved in sports, not involved in clubs, not involved in anything, they don't have any type of safety net for if they're going through a rough time. There's nowhere for them to go, or they feel like this. So you have some subset of like people that are socialized in a male way, and that leads to chauvinistic ideas and that sort of thing. But there's also a good chunk of the population, young population that.
Okay, we're gonna.
And that's even worse, because you can't even appeal to them in a way that you could to someone that at least has a social.
That's like, they're talking about the male loneliness epidemic, that's like part of it.
And it's like, I'm talking about that, like, they have to be careful not to extend, it's like, oh, poor little baby, like, a lot of the time they choose. It's a cycle where they choosing to be isolated.
Why do you think that is?
Honestly, a lot of it starts with race, and one of those things is, I know it's like such a, it feels like such an unserious thing to discuss, but it is such a.
All right,
It's,
you know what?
people will spend 10 hours during the summer instead of going outside, instead of actually being around people.
And they don't develop like.
Especially I live in the suburbs. People don't go outside unless they're doing this.
So since we.
So they sit in a house and they just are on their computer, on their, on whatever, for just hours and hours and hours.
That's like.
I wanted to make sure a couple of points out of this document, and then we can go like right social. So a couple of things that I realized otherwise, you know, I know something on feminist social, maybe you thought of what we do and it wasn't this. Oftentimes when we talk about socialist feminism, we put content into that, right? We say, this is what it is. We're doing something else here, right? Noticed. So I'm going to read a couple of the more analytic moments in this piece from 1972, just to kind of keep the thinking of this moment as well, alongside ours, keep us in a generational conversation. We understand, this is from page 15, it's after a little list, and then it's the, I guess it's this, oh gosh, I can't tell. I don't know, it's like
The third full paragraph.
Thank you so much. Third full paragraph. We understand that the primary reason, this comes back to something someone said, and I was like, ooh, I want to make sure to see how they were saying that point in 72. We understand that the primary reason for the weaknesses in relation to the development of women in our party is the fact that the party reflects the realities of the society we're living in. Does not get to be in this special hallowed zone of fabulosity all by itself. Under capitalism, women do not have equal employment, equal economic or social status. It is standard to consider housework and care of the family as totally women's work, despite minimum elevation of consciousness spurred by the women's liberation movement. Hundreds of thousands of Black and brown women live under these ideological effects of capitalism, multiplied by special genocidal attacks upon themselves and their families. Attacks related to repression, housing, welfare, cost of living, conditions which make life super challenge the task of feeding and caring for their children to make it through today. So that's an analytical chunk. That's sort of one of the insights and the ways of understanding why this work needs to be done. Because I think we're still in a moment where to critique is somehow to tear down. And they're like, no, critique is to keep us healthy. Critique isn't like, throw it in the garbage can, that's broken. This is a figure out how we are not living up to the standards that we hold, and not because we're not trying, maybe we're not trying, but that's not the only reason. It's also because we're trying to figure out how to get there in the world that we live. Like we're working in this is the air we breathe, and how do we produce another oxygen while we're still breathing the old oxygen? So that next paragraph, we need these women in the leadership of the people's movements. Here you can hear the urgency, the reason why they're pulling this together and doing this work. But they fight with a special militancy and steadfastness dictated by their own oppression. We need these women in the ranks and leadership of our party. We need these women who are the most exploited workers in the foundries, factories, hospitals, and other service occupations across our land. So this is where you start to hear their analysis. It's been a very practical, like, what's going on? Why is it happening? What should we do? What are we facing? And this is where you can hear kind of a
a grounding, an analysis. Okay. So, I'm going backwards now. I'm never reading in a straight line. I can't, because I'm not able. So there's a couple of issues that they take away, and then we're gonna break into our discussion, and I'm just gonna be scribing. I'm taking notes. I need this all written down. On page 14, and this will come back to the things that you're talking about in your small groups. The fight male comrades wage, this is on page 14 with the numbers 1, 2, 3. The fight male comrades wage against male supremacy and for full equality in relationship to issues in their trade unions, mass and party work. Oh, these are all questions. Oops. Party work. I did not say that like I said, like a question. What steps are we taking to overcome subjective obstacles preventing women's fullest involvement in mass work and party leadership? Obstacles such as lack of confidence and reticence. I'm hearing echoes, right? The net results of women's experience in a society which puts them down as women and as workers in a society ridden with male supremacist ideology and practice. I can't ask these as questions. Anyway, 3, what concrete steps are we taking in the struggle to free Black women comrades and enable them to participate more fully in giving leadership in mass activity and bringing them into direct leadership of the party? What specific help and encouragement are we offering which recognizes that their triple oppression creates obstacles that others do not experience? And we've heard the term intersectionality in our conversation. This is a term that's getting at a similar, it's not an identical term, but triple oppression comes from Claudia Jones as workers, as women, and as women of color, as Black women for Claudia Jones. So that triple oppression was a way to keep the complexity, to not flatten things all into like the same. Okay, so these were the questions that they came out of the conversation. I'm hoping that we just end with the discussion and me madly taking notes. So maybe we can open up the floor to what you were talking about. So let me bring us back to our question. I know I got us toppling off in another direction, but they're disconnected. Okay. Comrade Rubin pointed out that in the fight against male supremacy on a mass level, we have to ask and answer the question, what are the main problems and key ideological questions preventing males from entering struggles around women's issues?
They don't want to give up privilege.
Okay. Back to my pen. All right. You want to say more?
Well, assuming they have goodwill and they want to really learn about the issue, then they have to do some consciousness raising and see how their privilege affects the dynamics of the group or the movement or whatever it is.
So you're admitting that there's a loss, that something might be lost or perceived to be lost.
But they could gain a lot too by not having, and I don't know how much this is true today, like 30 years ago, but there's some crappy things about male roles that they can drop.
That's very relevant, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So don't want to give up privileges, the sense that like, if I talk less in a meeting, it won't be as much fun for me. Or if I'm not at the megaphone, well, I'm gonna feel like, why should I be at this rally?
Or if I'm not mansplaining what feminism is.
Then what fun is that? Right, okay.
Or
So
the women get it wrong, you know, I think there's also like, there's a big chauvinism in it, it's like, I could have said it better than that woman. You know, like, and then, you know, and.
But like, you're like reading, like.
And a great loss, it's hard to jump in, but like, a great loss in that is like, I think, like, we talked a lot about like the need to face the vulnerability and like the defensiveness that comes up in that. And like, one thing that I can say that me being socialized by a woman, like I was given a lot of space to be vulnerable and to be in tune with my emotions. And like, that was a privilege that I had. And like, when we talk about like this triple intersection having obstacles, it also has great insights. And like, that's why you're like, oh, wow, like Black trans femmes like gave us all the rights we ever had. Like, well, maybe let's just like ask them in the first place instead of waiting until things get like worse and worse and worse. So then being like, okay, can you clean this up real quick? It's like, like the work is still gonna get done, and it's still gonna get done by people who have experienced these intersectionalities and these marginalizations. And so it's just like, well, help them, you know, like maybe censor women's voices, but that doesn't mean that male voices don't have a role to play. Like those women people talk to more people if you talk to some people for them, like call out the dude so the woman doesn't have to later, you know, like.
I like the word experience, thank you, it's like lived experience, that counts for so much, yeah.
Yeah, the big this up, but what about the consistency between your personal life and your political life? In other words, if you're a patient in your personal life, if you do right the way, don't get a talk, how does it relate to the work it outside?
That's right.
You don't practice at all.
And I've noticed in this document, that's not something they talk about. I don't know if anyone noticed that when you were reading it. I'm like, how do we bring this into our party work? But party work has everything to do with homework or private life, right? So that was something I was reading, I'm like, what page is that on? So thank you for raising that. Yeah, that these aren't things that can just be worked on in explicitly political spaces. Yeah. Yeah.
We talked about perhaps from a slightly more optimistic angle that, you know, perhaps some men feel that they don't have a good understanding of women's issues as well as women do, which is probably true. But because of that, they feel like, oh, like, well, you know, we'll just let the women deal with that because they know those problems best. But as a result, they never like seek out that work and maybe like fail to support that work as well because they kind of just like push it out of their minds as something that they're not responsible for.
Yeah. And I hear a connection here in terms of vulnerability. What would it mean to say, I don't understand these issues that well. I'm gonna have to be vulnerable and find out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good, you're wrong,
And
I've been wrong, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, just to jump off of that, for me, like personally, as a man, it's very much a like it genuinely hope in good faith, I don't know, but like asking myself, like, what do I have to contribute? I don't think I have much I'd like to learn, but I don't know if like I'm like welcome in this space or not. Not in like a bad way, but in like a like, am I invading, you know?
Yeah. You should, okay, if you want, that's great. Yes.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like it can be a lot of like, two things at once, right? Because I feel like a lot of like men on the left in general, you know, they get radicalized because they see all this inequality. A lot of times in labor spaces and like, you know, I'm not making this seem as as my father made, or I never had a chance in this country like Nicky or whatever their individual experiences are, and then they maybe enter like a collective, but they haven't gotten rid of the mindset of like, well, I'm gonna be a protector and provider for a woman, and she's gonna own this, or like whatever kind of like specific socialization they have experienced. They haven't undone that. They haven't really even thought about it. And then they enter these spaces, and maybe it's a space like this, and they hear like, oh, this is what some male comrades have done wrong. And then the guard goes up, because they're like, oh, did I do that? And then it's like, and then the internal defense system kicks up because they don't want to be one of the bad guys. They don't want to be like the landlord. They don't want to be the capitalist, because suddenly they're in a position where it's like, have I done that? And I think it's kind of hard because, you know, when you're in a space as someone with a marginalized gender identity, you can't tell who's faking having good intentions and who actually has good intentions. Like, it's just, there's no way to like read someone's mind, because like, I mean, let's be real, there are male, or men on the left who put up a good amount of lip service, but then when they're in an interpersonal, romantic, or sexual, or even just friendship with a woman, they're not doing what they should be doing on even like the bare minimum level.
Yes.
So I think, going off of what Nico said, I think that there's like,
think part of it is this idea that like, so we were talking about how, and me and Miko have actually talked about this before as well, of like, when men come to the left, they can think about like class in like a really objective way. They can think about like, because our society is so segregated by class and by race, these are things that a lot of people don't think implicate themselves in a way when they have to confront these things. Not to say that like white guilt doesn't exist, because that's like a real big issue. But the way that our society is set up, there's not a man alive who in his own life doesn't in some way contribute to this issue with the women that he loves, or the women that he works with, or the women that he is friends with, or his mother, or his children, that there is a way in which he is a participant in the reliance on women's labor, that he participates in these same kind of inequalities in a very personal way. And so it becomes an immediate personal defense of, it's like, I can't recognize this in an objective like societal way because I'm concerned now about my own participation to the people that I care about in my life, that it's like, I'm doing this to them. And I think also on what Angela was saying, I think that there is a huge difference between accepting women's leadership on an issue and viewing an issue as women's work. I think that there's an importance of women's leadership on this question, but we're Marxists. We believe in unity. We believe in a scientific study of this issue. Men have to be a part of that. Men have to be a part of the process in unions and in organizations to root out this issue. That's not a thing that happens from one group of people alone. And so I think that is a thing that there becomes a point in which it's like, do you care? Do you care about women's equality in a material like way? Or is the conversation, I think one of the things we were talking about is like, is the fear of being called out as a sexist for saying something wrong, or being told that something that you've done is sexist, more important than the struggle for women's equality? And I think that is a thing that a lot of people need to ask themselves of like, am I more worried about being called out about something, or am I more worried about the fact that this work gets done?
I see your hand, I see your hand, I see your hand. We're just gonna go.
I mean, Ben already kind of made the point that I was thinking about, which is just that like, it's not only a level of like, we can take the empathetic view of like, oh, well, men don't want to overstep their boundaries and center their voices on topics related to feminism and women's liberation. But there's also that level of almost dismissiveness, not necessarily to the concept, but to the work itself, where, you know, a man might say something like, well, I want to center women's voices, you guys do that. But does that just result in them, giving the work to somebody else? So it can be kind of this facade of feminism when you're just pushing the work on somebody else. And just one, I'm not going to get into it because we talked about it for a long time, but something we were discussing about like, maybe as I'm only 18, as my generation grows and goes into institutions of higher education and gets involved in organizing spaces, I think there's probably going to be a lack of males in general, because there's just a total lack of interaction a lot of the time between male social groups and non-male social groups, to the point where not only do you not have a level of expertise that gives them an ability to talk on these subjects, but they don't even have the perspectives that they have had shared with them from any female or non-male friends to even begin to understand what these issues mean to people that actually experience them.
That's a profound insight.
I was so fascinated by this. Like, that's why we were talking for so long.
Thank you, thank you. Yes,
Hi,
can you give your name?
of course, my name is Dee Smith. Very nice to be here and see everybody. This is wonderful. I'm such a great time out. Thank you for what you're doing. So I was just gonna say that, and someone may have referenced this before, but men creating their own groups to work on, women's issues. And I don't know if that's come up here.
Not yet today. Thank you for adding that.
Because I'm hearing a lot about men, you know, being understandably concerned about not wanting to invade spaces where, you know, there may be work going on, that it's important that people have the safety to feel like they can talk openly. But I have been in a socialist feminist reading group in the past that men have been told that they should go, like, for their education, which I understand the positive intent. It meant that the women did not share, the men did most of the sharing and the women did not share very much. But when I asked one of the men who was attending, you know, how would you feel about setting up a socialist feminist reading group for men, you know, so that you all talk openly? And he was really shocked and just kind of scoffed and said, you know, I would never do something like that. And actually, when I talked in at least a couple of different socialist settings about the value of different identity groups working in coalition, but also having separate space to be able to talk about their own identity issues, I've been told that that is not, you know, not ideologically correct attitude or whatever, when in fact, I think that, you know, in many different spaces, people recognize that it is important for there to be a safe space where people can talk really. Certainly women, in my experience, women always will defer to, because that's our social nature, and that's how we've been socialized.
Yeah, my head is spinning now. So,
Can you tell me?
oh, Dina, yeah. I think at this point, it's a little bit disingenuous to say what the women want. You know, there's so many books out there at this point that any man can pick up and read what the deal is with that. There are men's groups. There's Men Against Rape. Men Against Violence Against Women. They're tiny groups, but they're out there. You could do your own consciousness raising, but more importantly, okay, so there's a McCarthyism going on right now in this country against feminism. In the left, within the left.
We started there.
Yeah. say that.
We started there.
Okay.
Today.
Silencing women. I know women who have been fired from jobs for saying women get abortions. Okay, the word woman has been weaponized now. This is serious.
Oh, I know.
It takes away our ability to even claim who we are and meet to discuss anything. So I agree with Dee, we both need separate spaces to do organizing and then come together in coalition. But I think we have to deal with this elephant in the living room, because all of the left spaces I know that claim to be feminists are led by men.
Well, just before we wrap up, just one thing I want to say, because it actually kind of goes into what everyone's saying. We have like 2 minutes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
So, but what I wanted to say, I was actually going to bring up, was that also we need to have like the men who don't perpetuate these violent behaviors, like calling it out when we see it. And just to use it as an example, like some of what you just said about the word woman being weaponized kind of gives me kind of like trans exclusionary radical feminism vibes. So I just want to be clear that like the word woman is like a broad term to describe a lot of different people with a lot of different identities and experiences. But just as I'm here, like making sure that I call out people or call them in, right? Because this is a space where we're like safe to ask questions and pose things that maybe not everyone agrees with. Men need to be doing this for other men, just like I would be doing it right now for something that if I heard wasn't necessarily inclusive of someone, or there was a group that I've heard this rhetoric being used against, right? Like I would say that, and I have had to do it, and I've lost friends because of it. So, but in that vein, first of all, let's give a round of applause for our.
Thank you for letting this talk for 2 hours.
Right? No, this was absolutely incredible. I want to give you like a few minutes to just kind of wrap things up, but then we have a few little announcements before we leave, and then our time will be up. But thank you so much, everyone, for.
Thank you so much. I want to thank everyone for like coming like full body to this space. And we have not met before, many of us, and having that generosity to share and to think through ideas that are
not safe ideas, they can feel dangerous, they can feel vulnerable making, so I like bottom of my heart, and I hope you don't mind, but these I will type up. The comments from our conversation are powerful and valuable and help me think through some questions that I've been thinking about. So I just want to say thank you for that, just the generosity of your thinking and your brilliance as well. You know, there's a lot more to say. We've had 2 hours. Hopefully this is just the beginning. And thinking about ways that this is all about how to take the problems. I mean, this point about criticism is really, really important. The criticism, like finding the ways to absorb the critique as the, oh, thank God, because what if they didn't respect me enough to tell me I just screwed up in that particular way? Or I need to think this through a little bit more. We may not end up agreeing, but I have to think through this a little bit more again. And then doing some of that with somebody either you really, really trust, or maybe someone that you kind of met recently and do that work. So I think in the spirit of the document, the very weird, I've never taught a class with such an open-ended work in progress, kind of meant to be in-house, and that you showed it could float. Thank you for that. Because this is a first for me. And thank you again. And I'm in Northampton, Massachusetts. If anyone makes their way up there, I can be found. So please reach out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I know some of you came in a little bit late, but just again, this was put on by Claudia Jones School for Political Education. And the point of these are to be interactive, to have the questions, and hopefully to make some connections along the way so that you can, you know, take this out into whatever collective you may be a part of. One thing, because I know some people did come in, if you didn't sign in, and you would just like to be kept abreast of other events, and then also just for data reasons, like we do want to know who shows up, because if it is only like a specific group, how do we get other people to come in the room as well, right? And make sure that they're heard and ready to be, you know, having the discussion. So please sign in. Otherwise, are there any last announcements that you'd like to add as far as upcoming? And yeah,
I guess follow our like social media so that you can stay tuned for our next Saturday school.
Yeah.
Is in the works.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't mind, grab your